Good evening and welcome to the Neighborhood Watch Coyote Seminar with Florida Fish and Wildlife. I'm Gloria Kelly, the Neighborhood Watch Liaison for the Village of Wellington. Joining me this evening, we have our Village Manager, Jim Barnes, Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office Deputy Harper, and Florida Fish and Wildlife's Certified Wildlife Biologist, Angeli Barker. As a reminder, all attendees are on listen-only mode and this meeting is being recorded. If you have any questions during this meeting, please submit them in the Q&A icon, which is visible by tapping your screen on your mobile device or hovering your mouse over your screen if using a desktop or laptop. The icon will then appear on the top or bottom. We will answer all questions at the conclusion of the presentations. The Village of Wellington currently has 22 active neighborhood watch groups. These watch groups serve a variety of functions within the community. Participation in an active watch group provides members with access to grant funding and neighborhood watch night out events that may not be available to neighborhoods without an active watch group, in addition to providing them with tools that support the safety of the community. Wellington is currently looking for residents to become block captains for their street or block. These captains are an integral component to keeping each block or street actively involved in crime prevention efforts, as well as the important process of information exchange between neighbors, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, and the Village of Wellington. If you are interested in becoming a block captain or have questions about the Neighborhood Watch program, please email gkelly@wellingtonfl.gov. At this time, I would like to introduce Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office Deputy Harper.
Good evening, Ms. Kelly. Sorry, I had a small issue with the mute there. And to everyone in attendance, I just wanted to say thank you for attending the meeting and spending some time with us here today, especially with the current presentation. As it regards to law enforcement and particularly coyotes, once in a while we do get these notifications when these animals might enter a backyard, go after a small pet, or when they're misidentified or misclassified by somebody when they encounter them. What we will say is, for our end, if you're unsure, you can keep your distance unless directed differently by a professional, which we are about to listen to shortly. But just to make sure that you're remaining safe, small children, dogs, pets are away because they tend to be opportunistic predators, as well as being careful not to feed or encourage them onto your property are the ways that we like to approach this issue. You also want to make sure that you do have the number for a trapper or a company that you have used before when it comes to some of the critters or nuisance animals you might encounter here in Wellington, small gators, coyotes, and or some of the snakes like we had identified last week. We definitely want to have that number prepared. As far as us engaging any animal of the sort, it would only be in an extreme case where human lives are in danger. And I don't believe this is the type of animal where it would arise to that if enough aggression is shown. And with that, I will definitely defer to Ms. Barker. And if there are more law enforcement oriented questions that do come up, I will also be here to answer any of those questions as well.
And without further ado, we'd like to introduce Ms. Barker from Florida Fish and Wildlife.
Good evening. I'm Angeline Barker with FWC. I really appreciate you guys coming out this evening and spending your time learning about coyotes. So without delay, I'm just going to go right on into it. Gloria, if you can confirm that you can see my screen.
Yes, I can see it in the PowerPoint side with the slides on the left.
And
perfect. Yep.
All right, so you can see the presentation. If for any reason you can't hear me, Gloria, if you'll stop and let me know. I'm in the office today. I have good internet connection, so hopefully we'll have no glitches.
Sure.
So once again, good evening, everyone. My name is Angeline Barker. I'm a wildlife biologist with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. For those of you who don't know FWC, as we're our short acronym, we are the State Wildlife Regulatory Agency. We are tasked with managing and researching wildlife in the state of Florida and holding wildlife in the public trust. Most people know FWC from hunting and fishing. So if you like to hunt or you like to fish, we regulate those activities and the seasons and the bag limits and the catch rates on those species. But we're a lot more than that. FWC does everything from alligator management to managing lands like wildlife management areas, to doing coral reef research, to rescuing manatees, to removing pythons out of the Everglades. We're a pretty large agency, given how large Florida is. The part of the agency that I'm involved in is pretty small. My job is to assist the public with conflict wildlife issues. My staff and I are housed around the state. We are talking to the public every day about how to minimize conflicts with wildlife. So think bears. Bears are the #1 thing we talk to folks about. I realize not in Palm Beach County, but throughout the state, bears are the biggest thing for us. We also talk to folks about bats, about snakes, about sandhill cranes, about foxes, about raccoons, and coyotes. Coyotes are the #1 thing that I personally am dealing with. And I'm really pleased to be able to present to you today on coyotes in Florida. So let's roll right on into this. One of the first questions we're often asked about coyotes is, why are they here? Coyotes didn't used to be in Florida, and there's some truth to that. When the Spanish came and first colonized the state of Florida, there were no coyotes here, but there were red wolves. Red wolves and gray wolves are important to the coyote story for a couple of reasons. Where you tend to have high wolf populations, you tend to have lower coyote populations because wolves compete with coyotes and they predate on coyotes. In the mid-19th century, when colonization really took place rampantly across North America, society was against having predators on the landscape. So if you can think back to history lessons a little bit, society nearly wiped out a lot of the predators on this continent. So wolves, alligators, bears, cougars, panthers, all were systematically removed. Wolves, back up. Red wolves were extirpated from the state of Florida by 1920 due to human persecution. Gray wolves were also extirpated throughout most of their historic range in the western United States. The reason why this is important is for those reasons I mentioned to you earlier. Where you don't have high wolf populations, you can have higher coyote populations. So the demise and the removal of wolves across the landscape really allowed coyotes to start moving from the western United States to the eastern United States. Keep in mind that little tidbit as I move through the presentation. Also keep in mind that everything we did to remove and nearly wipe out bears, wolves, alligators, cougars off the landscape, we were doing the coyotes too. Coyotes did not get a pass. Yet, coyotes have expanded their range a lot. I'll talk more about that more in a second. One of the other reasons that coyotes have moved into Florida and across the eastern United States is our conversion to an agricultural landscape. Pastures, meadows, fields are where coyotes like to be. And as we started converting to ag, we started opening up more landscape like this. So the demise of the wolves and our conversion to an agricultural landscape allowed them to start moving from the western United States to the eastern United States. This is a color-coded map by decade of the history of the migration of coyotes across North America. And look how quickly they moved from the western United States outwards. I can't think of another mid-sized mammal that has expanded its range this much while being heavily persecuted by people. People were shooting coyotes, we were trapping coyotes, we were poisoning coyotes, yet they expanded their range to now every state in the continental United States, and they have almost moved to a new continent. If you can see down there on the map, let me see if I'll move my cursor here. They have almost crossed the Panama Canal, and so they're about to move into South America if they haven't already. That is impressive for a mid-sized mammal to have expanded its range like this. And there are some reasons they've done that, and I'll talk more about that here in just a few moments. Now, if we want to look specifically at Florida and the history of the migration of coyotes in Florida, the first research project that documented coyotes in the state was by Brady and Campbell in 1983, and all of the counties shaded in green had documented coyote presence. Notice this county right here. This is Orange County, so this is the Orlando metropolitan area. So the Disney World area has had coyotes there for more than 30 years. Orlando is very densely populated, as I'm sure you know. Woody and Hardesty in 1990 confirmed coyotes in all of these counties. So Broward County had coyotes at this time. It's just a matter of time before they moved into Palm Beach. Since survey data done by Dr. Marty Main with the University of Florida confirmed coyotes in Sarasota and Volusia counties. Carcass data by Dr. Main confirmed coyotes in St. Lucie County. And personal communication with Dr. Main and FWC has confirmed coyotes in all 67 counties in the state. So it really does not matter if you're in Miami or you're in the Yeehaw Junction or you're at Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge or you're in Pensacola, you equally have a good chance of running into a coyote, no matter where you are in the state of Florida. Their most southern observation to date was in Key Largo in 2011. So there's a couple of important things about Key Largo. One is that's where the largest feral cat colony in the state is located. So big guess why the coyotes decided to go to Key Largo. Also, I'm sure as you know, Key Largo is an island. So a lot of people scratch their heads and go, wait a second, how did the coyotes get there? The coyotes either used the bridges and roadways or they swam. And it turns out coyotes are pretty strong swimmers. This is a picture from the Lake Worth Lagoon in Palm Beach County. I want you to notice what's behind that coyote in this picture. That's a channel marker. So this coyote was pretty far out when this picture was taken by an environmental employee on a vessel. So coyotes can swim. They're very strong swimmers and they can get to some of our smaller barrier islands. So Sanibel and Captiva have coyotes on them. I'm fairly certain there's coyotes on Key Biscayne. There's coyotes on Gasparilla and Siesta Key. Really, they can show up anywhere in the state of Florida. I want to talk to you just a little bit about coyote biology. I don't want to bore you a whole lot with biology, but I want to talk a little bit about biology so you understand kind of what they're doing if you happen to see one in your communities in Wellington. Coyotes are omnivorous, which means they're going to eat just about everything. And I'm going to talk more about that in a second. They are highly adaptable. This is one of the most intelligent wildlife species that's living in Florida today. Adult coyotes range in size between 25 and 40 pounds. They do a really good job at looking bigger than they are. They're long-legged, they're long-bodied. If they're shedding, they can look a lot fuzzier. But in reality, they're about the size of a mid-sized dog. So they're really not as big as most folks think they are. Home range size for coyotes is variable. In a natural area, so think Belle Glade, think Pahokee, they're going to have about a 15 square mile home range. But in an urban environment like Wellington or Boca Raton or West Palm Beach, their territory is going to get a lot smaller. It's going to shrink. It's only going to be about 3 square miles. The reason why is because where there are people, there is more food for coyotes. There's garbage, there's raccoons, there's pet food, there's rats, there's roaches, there's birdseed, there's roadkill. Everything they need is in a really small space if they're living around people. So they don't need a big territory. They can live in a smaller space if they're living in urban environments. Coyotes mate in the winter. They have pups in the spring. Their litter size is on average 6, but this is dependent on food. The more food that's available to them, the more young they can have. The less food that's available to them, the less young they will have. And unlike domestic dogs, coyotes are monogamous. They mate for life. They have very strong pair bonds between the male and the female. Also, unlike domestic dogs, the male coyote is very involved in raising his young. He is there, he's at the den, he's right there raising the young along with the female. Whereas domestic dogs, that male has no parental responsibility at all. Kind of shows you how different they are from other canines. Now, I mentioned earlier that they'll eat just about anything. FWC did a diet study of coyotes in Florida a few years back. Now, we knew they were eating anything that they could get a hold of, but we were curious what was sustaining them. So we were collecting coyotes that had been hit by cars and killed, or that were trapped or shot by hunters, and we were looking at their gut contents. So what you can see on this map, or on this pie graph, is 31% of their diet was mammal related. Not a surprise. So that's things like squirrels and raccoons and rabbits and mice and rats. But what was a surprise was vegetation at 30%. I didn't expect that coyotes would rely so much on plant material. But what was even bigger a surprise to us was part of the pie, anthropogenic. So anthropogenic is human-related foods. This is what's pulling coyotes into communities and can cause them to be a conflict with people. I'm going to show you some things that we've pulled out of coyote gut contents in the next couple of slides. I realize it's around dinner time or getting close to dinner time. These pictures are not graphic. I wouldn't do that to you, I promise. But I really want you to see how variable their diet is. So the first picture, this is dog food. Dog food is really high in calories. And let's think about dog food for a second. Dog food is designed to entice your dog to eat it. Dog food is not what dogs would eat naturally. So there are things put in that dog food that make it aromatic, that make them want to eat it. It's not just with dogs though. Wildlife will eat it too. And dog food is really high in calories. And so you might be asking yourself, how did this coyote get dog food? It's hard to say. Somebody might have left food on their back porch for their dog and the coyote might have got it instead. Maybe somebody was intentionally feeding the coyote, which is illegal. I'll talk more about that later. But this picture right here is a really big problem. Coyotes getting into dog food or cat food, this is a huge draw to bring them into urban areas. Next picture, this is cooked chicken. I want you to notice where this coyote came from. This animal was hit by a car in Pinellas County. Pinellas County is the most densely human populated county in the state. If a coyote can live in St. Petersburg or in Clearwater, they can live anywhere. How exactly did a coyote get cooked chicken in his system? He either scavenged it, maybe got to some trash, maybe somebody intentionally fed this animal too. But this slide is a really good representation of why coyotes are drawn into urban environments. Okay, next picture. This is a coyote's stomach. It's a weird color, it's purple. That's not normal. We think that this coyote was eating pokeweed. Pokeweed is a native weedy plant that has bright purple berries on it. It's kind of important for songbird migration. We think this coyote ate so much of it that it stained its stomach purple. So that's some of the vegetative component that we didn't expect. Here's a McDonald's wrapper. And look where this coyote came from. This animal was hit by a car in the Ocala National Forest. The Ocala National Forest is a huge piece of public land, yet this coyote still managed to find garbage. How did he do that? Did he hit the McDonald's dumpster next to Ocala National Forest? Did somebody bring garbage in that he got into? Hard to say, but that was kind of sad in my opinion that an animal that's living where it's supposed to live, some people would say, still can find human-related foods. Next picture. Here's a mini eggs wrapper, and again from public land, from a state park. Next picture. This is my favorite picture from the whole study. This is a total of 47 small mammals that were found in the stomach of one coyote. These all look like mice to me. Notice that they're mostly whole, which is kind of odd. It takes the coyote about 5 hours to digest its meal. So this coyote ate nearly 50 mice in the 5 hours before it died. That's incredible from a rodent control standpoint. That is just amazing. And I've got one picture left. This is a substantial amount of insects, and I'm not sure if you can read what's on the card right there because it's kind of small, but that says roaches, which is just gross. That's a lot of roaches for one coyote to eat in 5 hours. So again, the point of showing you all of these pictures is to share, they really will eat and consume anything that's available to them. This is why they're so good at surviving and living around people. Now, in that diet study, every coyote that came into that diet study was weighed. And so this graph is showing you actual weights of those animals that came into this study. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because we're consistently getting phone calls from the public telling us that they're seeing 60 and 70 and 80 pound coyotes in their neighborhoods. Either they're exaggerating and they're overestimating the animal's weight, or truly, if they're seeing a 60 or 70 or 80 pound canine in a neighborhood, it's a domestic dog. And there are some domestic dogs that are bred to look like coyotes or that are hybridized with wolves. There's some unique breeds that can make you think they're coyotes, but coyotes are pretty small. This study, they were averaging 27 pounds. So again, about the size of a mid-sized dog. Okay, what's good about coyotes in Florida? Are there any good things about having them here? Are there any ecological benefits to having them in the state? Certainly one is their aesthetic value. A lot of people really appreciate wildlife in Florida, whether they live in Florida or they're visiting Florida for wildlife viewing opportunities, like looking at manatees, going to the Everglades to see wading bird colonies, or others. Coyotes contribute to that. If you can catch a scene like this, or one of the adults is tending their young at the den, it is rather endearing. We also know folks really like to hear coyotes howling at night sometimes. It reminds people of being close to wilderness or being close to nature. Some people also really don't like to hear coyotes howling at night. But coyotes do add aesthetic value to us for wildlife viewing opportunities, and that's important to many of us today. Another thing coyotes can do is they can control smaller predators. So remember, the red wolf, the native canine to Florida, was wiped out of Florida by 1920. There are some scientists that think coyotes are providing a more balanced ecosystem to Florida by filling the role that the red wolf left behind. So let me give you an example. Let's take raccoons. You can have as many as 25 raccoons per square mile in some cases, and that's when they're not being artificially fed by people. And there's one thing raccoons are really good at besides getting into trash. Raccoons are good nest predators. That's their thing. They are really good at raiding nests. If coyotes are helping to control the raccoon population, coyotes are indirectly helping some of our threatened and endangered bird species, like roseate spoonbills, like loggerhead shrikes, like bobwhites, like mallards or wattled ducks. Now, this does not mean that if a coyote came across a bobwhite quail nest that he wouldn't eat it. He'd totally eat it. But they're not usually seeking out those nests like they are seeking out the predators of those nests, like raccoons. So because of this, like I mentioned, some scientists think coyotes are providing a more balanced ecosystem into Florida by filling the role that the red wolf no longer has in the state. But what about some bad things? Are there negative ecological impacts to having coyotes in Florida? Competition with our native predators could certainly be one, and panthers almost automatically come to mind when you think of native predators. Panthers and coyotes like to eat the same things. They like to eat hogs and they like to eat deer, but panthers like to eat older age class hog and deer, while coyotes like to eat young age class hog and deer. We also know that panthers and coyotes don't really like to live in the same place. Coyotes like big open areas. They like pastures and meadows and fields and golf courses and cemeteries. And panthers really don't like to be around people. They would prefer dense habitat, and they're solitary in their movements. And even though the panther is an endangered species, their population has slowly been increasing. If coyotes were negatively impacting panthers, we should see the panther population declining, and we're not seeing that. So based on all of that, we don't think that coyotes are negatively impacting panthers at this time. But there's another native cat in Florida, the bobcat. Bobcats are very common around the state. They're around the same size as coyotes. They like to live and eat the same things as coyotes do. So Dr. Marty Main with the University of Florida was curious if coyotes were negatively impacting bobcats. He put radio collars on bobcats and coyotes on the Avon Park bombing range in Highlands and Polk counties. And what you're seeing from this weird looking map are bobcat and coyote territories. So coyote territories are in blue and bobcat territories are in red. And then the shaded in areas like right here, this polka dotted spot, this is representing a coyote's den. And the red striped areas is representing a bobcat's denning site. So what you can take away almost immediately from looking at this is coyote and bobcat territories are overlapping with each other by a lot in some cases, but their denning sites are not. They're backing up to each other in a couple spots like right here, but they're not overlapping. And what that is suggesting is that bobcats and coyotes are coexisting. They're living in the same environment. They're not driving each other out. They're living in the same place. Now, we don't know if coyotes and bobcats are behaving this way in urban areas. Nobody's really looked into this. But one of my staff a few years ago put out some trail cameras outside of Tampa Bay for a landowner who was losing his domestic turkeys. We were trying to help him determine what was predating his turkeys. We got a bobcat and a coyote on that camera in the same evening. So this is a little anecdotal, but it's suggestive that perhaps bobcats and coyotes are coexisting with each other in more urban environments in Florida as well. Another potentially negative thing about coyotes in the environment is they can prey on rare and endangered species. Now, I just told you guys a couple minutes ago that they can help some rare and endangered species. They can hurt some rare and endangered species in some cases too. Specifically, sea turtles, beach nesting birds, or burrowing owls, things that are ground nesters, can sometimes take a hit from coyotes if coyotes learn to predate them. I mentioned earlier, they're not nest predators, that's not their thing, but if one coyote learns to target sea turtles or target shorebirds, they can have major impacts to those species nesting on the beach. And sometimes beach managers have to make some tough decisions about removing coyotes to protect some of those rare and endangered species. But it's almost a double-edged sword, because if you remove the coyote from the beach, you might be allowing those smaller predators like raccoons and foxes and opossums, who are more efficient nest predators, onto the beach, who may cause more damage. So these are things that beach managers have to weigh when it comes to managing rare and endangered species. Now, there's some ugly things about coyotes in Florida too, and that's the human conflicts. And that's what I'm going to talk most about, or for the rest of the presentation I'm going to discuss, and that's probably what brought most of you on to watch this presentation this evening. I will start by saying that, in my opinion, I think coyotes have a pretty undeserved public reputation. And there are some myths and misconceptions that drive the really negative public perception that people have of them. One is their size, and I talked about it earlier. They're not nearly as big as most folks think they are. They're about the size of a mid-sized dog. Packs is another one. I really dislike using the word pack when I talk about coyotes. When I think of packs, I think of a bunch of feral dogs that are unrelated. They get together, that do bad stuff, like running livestock. That's a definite thing that feral dogs will do. Coyotes are territorial. The only coyotes they allow within their territory are their family. So, for example, in this picture, you're looking at, I'm pretty sure, the alpha male coyote here in the center. One of these two behind him is the alpha female. The other is their offspring from the previous year that's hanging back to help them raise the young of the next generation. They only allow their family within their territory. So if you ever see more than one, like in this picture, it's a family group. It's either a mated pair or their offspring. And they will move together and they will hunt together, especially if they're teaching their young to hunt. But think of it more as a family unit rather than as a pack. Coy dogs and coy wolves is another one. So a coy dog is when a coyote and a dog get together and they have offspring. That's really hard from a biological standpoint, because coyotes and dogs' breeding cycles don't match. Dogs tend to breed in the spring and in the fall. Coyotes tend to breed in the winter. And remember, coyotes are monogamous. So if a female coyote chooses a dog to breed with, she's going to be at a disadvantage because the dog's not going to hang around to help her raise the young. We don't have any evidence of coy dogs in Florida, but coy dogs have been recorded in Western ecosystems on rare occasions. Coy wolves are when a coyote and a wolf get together and have offspring, and there's a lot of debate in the scientific community and a lot of research going on up and down the eastern seaboard to determine if coy wolves exist. But right now, there's no evidence of coy wolves in Florida, primarily because there are no wolves in Florida for them to breed with. Disease is another one. Now, don't mistake me here. Coyotes can absolutely carry diseases. they're going to carry can carry the same diseases that you'd vaccinate your dog for. So they can get rabies, they can get mange, they can get distemper and heartworm and tapeworm. But just because you see a coyote out during the daylight hours does not mean that it's a diseased animal. Almost all of the pictures I've shown you today have been of day active coyotes. That's totally normal. Or if you see one that's a different color, like this one that's black, does not mean it's a diseased animal either. That being said, you definitely don't want to let your pets interact with coyotes or any other wildlife from a disease concern, but not every coyote is diseased. And of course, and finally, Hollywood and Wile E. Coyote always make us think that coyotes are up to no good, but they're really just trying to survive in a pretty tough environment, just like any other wild animal is. Additionally, another negative aspect about coyotes is they can predate livestock. This is a learned behavior. Not every coyote will do this. And there are some things that some small operations that have smaller livestock, there are some things they can do to prevent this. So using good fencing, using electric fencing is really, really good way to prevent predation by coyotes. Using corrals, and barns are all really good ways to prevent predation. Another popular item in Florida recently to prevent predation by wildlife on livestock has been donkeys and llamas. Donkeys and llamas hate canines. They are well known to run coyotes and other wildlife off. To be clear, coyotes are mostly a threat to small livestock. So goats, sheep, chickens, they are really not a threat to horses. Horses are much too large for coyotes to want to take on. It's mostly smaller livestock. And again, not every coyote does this. This is a learned behavior. But most often where FWC is getting involved, especially with my staff and I, when we're talking to the public, it has to do with urban coyotes and pet loss. I don't want to sugarcoat this for you, so I'm going to be blunt here. Coyotes and other wildlife will absolutely predate your pets if they are available. Anytime a cat is free ranging, it is open to predation, and it's not just coyotes. Coyotes are more notorious and well known for taking cats, but bobcats take domestic cats. So do alligators, so do bears, so do panthers if you're in panther country, so do large raptors, so do big dogs. There's a lot of risks that come to cats when they're free ranging outdoors. Predation is one of them. As long as your cat is free ranging, it's part of the ecosystem and it is open to predation. For small dogs, typically when small dogs are predated by coyotes, it's when they're not on a leash, when they're not with a person, and they're not in a fenced-in yard. Most of these cases are when little dog goes outside at dawn or dusk by itself to go to the bathroom. Coyote happens to be there, takes advantage of the opportunity, and it's just that fast. But again, it's not just coyotes. Coyotes get the most notoriety for taking small dogs too, but so do all of those other predators I just mentioned. Bobcats, alligators, bears if you're in bear country, panthers if you're in panther country, large raptors if you have a really small dog, and of course larger dogs are also risks to pets. There are some really easy ways to prevent pets from being predated upon, and I can't tell you how heartbreaking it is to get phone calls from the public who have lost a pet to wildlife. It is absolutely heartbreaking. But there are some really easy things that we can do as pet owners to prevent that from happening. Keeping cats indoors takes them completely out of the equation of being predated. For small dogs, keeping them on short leashes or with you or in a well-fenced-in yard is really the best way to keep them from interacting with wildlife as well. By small dog, I'm meaning 20 pounds or less. Most dogs that are over the 30-pound mark really aren't at risk from predation from coyotes. They may be at risk from things like alligators if they're approaching the water's edge. And again, I can't stress enough that it's not just coyotes. If you recall, I showed you some trail camera pictures earlier where we had a bobcat and a coyote on that camera outside of Tampa Bay. I also had a domestic cat on that camera. In the same evening, in the same hour, in the same 8 minutes that the coyote was there. I don't know if this cat survived. I don't know if this was the landowner's cat or a free-ranging cat or a feral cat or what. But I really want to drive this point home that it's more than just coyotes that can predate pets that are living in your area. And again, there are some really easy ways to prevent that from happening. Now you might be asking yourself at this point, well, am I safe from coyotes? And the answer to that is yes, you are safe from coyotes. Coyote attacks on people are exceedingly rare. To put it into perspective, I've compared dog bites to coyote bites or coyote attacks to dog attacks to give you an idea of how rare it is. So between 1970 and 2015, there were about 9 attacks by coyotes per year in the United States and Canada. Most of these attacks by coyotes on people were people doing something they shouldn't have been doing, like giving the coyote a hot dog, or they were the victim of someone doing something they shouldn't have been doing, like the coyote had previously been fed, coyote got aggressive and bit somebody else who was minding their own business. In that time frame, there were 2 people killed by coyotes in the US and Canada. Compare that to the domestic dogs. There's more than 1,000 emergency room visits every day in this country from dog bites. There's more than 5 million cases a year that require medical treatment. And more than 200 people lost their lives from dogs between 2013 and 2018. So statistically, your chances of being bitten by a coyote, especially if you're doing all of the right things like not feeding them, is very, very, very low. So you may be asking yourself at this point, well, can't all the coyotes just go away? Can't we just get rid of them all? And you may know the answer to that before I say it. The answer is no. Eradication efforts for coyotes have failed dramatically across the nation. There have been other states that have tried this. And remember, coyotes have been persecuted for 150 or 200 years now. They've been persecuted for a long time, and yet they've expanded their range to every state in the union with the exception of Hawaii. This is partially due to their breeding dynamics. Where coyotes are locally suppressed, the coyotes living in the territories nearby can increase their reproduction. This is because of food and space. This is what the limiting factor for most predators. So let's say for argument's sake that all of the coyotes in Lantana are removed. There's a disease event, something happens and they're all gone. All of a sudden, the coyotes in Green Acres or in Lake Worth are going to start increasing their reproduction because there's more food available and there's more territory available where those coyotes in Lantana used to be, which is kind of incredible. They're territorial with high replacement. They're adaptable and intelligent. They can eat almost anything. They are absolutely here to stay. There's also an ethical question of, should society eradicate coyotes? Again, they might be providing a more balanced ecosystem to Florida, and eradication of a native species to the continent isn't exactly in line with modern conservation or management principles either. So what can you do? What can you do to prevent problems with coyotes? There's a couple of things you can do, and I really want to focus the last couple of minutes on this. How can you prevent conflicts with coyotes that are living in your neighborhoods today? So the first one is to secure your attractants. Attractants is anything that can attract a dog or a cat or a raccoon can attract a coyote. Please don't feed them. Don't feed coyotes. It's not worth it. Whether it's directly handing them a hot dog or indirectly leaving your garbage out in a manner that attracts the coyote, please don't feed them, or raccoons or foxes or really any other small mammal. You want to secure your garbage, keep it inside of a secure structure, like a garage or a shed is really the best thing to do. Put it on the curb the morning of trash day instead of the night before. That gives wildlife and coyotes less opportunity to get into it. We'd suggest cleaning up pet food, fallen fruit, and bird feeders. As I've shown you some of the pictures from earlier, coyotes will absolutely take advantage of this if this is available. And bird seed and pet food is high in calories. You want to keep cats indoors. Anytime a cat is free ranging, as I mentioned earlier, they are 100% open to predation. And for small dogs, you want to keep them on short leashes and supervised when they're outside. By short leashes, I mean 6 foot or less. If you have a small dog on a retractable and it goes all the way out to the end of the retractable, like 20 feet or so, you have no recourse to intervene if something bad happens. If a coyote comes up to it, or if your small dog goes nose to nose with a coral snake or cane toad, or gets into the road, or gets into it with a bigger dog, you won't have any recourse to intervene in that situation. So we really strongly suggest keeping dogs on a 6 foot leash or less. You can also haze coyotes. So I know hazing, it's a term that a lot of people associate with fraternities. That's not quite what I mean. By hazing, what I'm suggesting is establishing some human dominance. Let that coyote know that it's, you know what, it's really not okay for him to be hanging out in your neighborhood. A lot of times when people encounter coyotes, they don't know what to do, or they get scared and they run, or they get in their car, or they go in their house and they get their camera out. And the coyote the whole time is learning, oh, okay, all I have to do is show up and this crazy person's gonna leave. I own the place. That's not what we want coyotes to do. We want them to yield to human presence. We want them to know that we're the dominant ones and they need to go. There's some really easy ways to haze coyotes. This isn't typically hard. Usually yelling at them does the trick. Raising your voice, asserting some dominance, like you would yell at your dog if it got on the furniture. Usually that's all it takes, but you can use other options too if you're comfortable. You can throw rocks and sticks at the animal. The intent is not to injure the coyote. The intent is to get it to leave your view. You can use whistles. You can use pots and pans. You can use a coyote shaker, which is a soda can, an empty soda can that has rocks in it. That's kind of loud when you shake it. You can use water pistols. You can use motion lights. Anything you can do to get that animal's attention and let it know that it's really not okay for him to be in your backyard or be in your driveway or be on your sidewalk. You're the dominant one. Make it leave. The intent, again, this is all if you feel comfortable. The intent is to drive the coyote out of your view. If you start hazing it and you stop after it turns around and starts to walk away, it'll learn, oh, okay, all I gotta do is turn around and that crazy person's gonna stop yelling at me. Keep going, keep yelling at it, keep throwing stuff at it, do what it takes if you're comfortable to get that animal to leave your view. I have bear spray listed down here. I wanna give a caveat with that real quick. I would absolutely not use bear spray unless you have that animal within 15 feet of you. If you see a coyote at like 60 yards and you deploy bear spray, you're not going to do anything. It's not going to work. One of our bear biologists described bear spray as using it as the nuclear option, for lack of a better term. You should only deploy bear spray if you had a coyote or another wild animal really close to you within about 15 feet. I prefer bear spray over pepper spray. Pepper spray tends to come out in a stream and you have to have good aim. Bear spray comes out in a fog and it comes out about 15 feet ahead of you. Bear spray has capsaicin pepper in it. So when the animal breathes it in, it causes their respiratory tract to close. So it might go from, hey, I want to look at your little dog, to I can't breathe anymore and I have to get out of here. You want to be careful before you deploy which way the wind is blowing, because if it blows back in your face, it's going to affect you too and your dog. So just be cognizant of those things before you were to do this. And again, you only want to do this if the coyote was in a short space of you. Now, if you do everything I'm suggesting, you haze the coyotes, you secure your attractants, you bring your pets inside, coyotes aren't moving out. There's other natural foods that are holding them there, like raccoons and rats and rodents and rabbits and squirrels. But they should start to become they should start to become less dominant, and they should start yielding to you. They may change their activity. They may stop coming out during the day and start coming out at night, because if they come out during the day, that means they're getting harassed by people. Those are the coyotes you want. It's almost like you're training your local animals. If you can train your local animals to yield to humans, remember, they're territorial. They're going to keep all the other coyotes out. And those are really the animals you would rather have in your communities than the ones that feel really comfortable walking up your driveway. Additionally, We have a video on how to haze coyotes. I'm not going to play it for you today because it's a little glitchy coming over Zoom, but it's on our website. If you go to myfwc.com/coyote, it's on our website there. It's about 3 minutes. You're going to see some crazy person yelling at a coyote on a golf course. I'd like you to know that crazy person is me. I hazed a coyote on a golf course in Clearwater. This coyote had been around people for a while, and it did exactly what it was supposed to do. It immediately got up, looked at me like I was nuts, kept moving off, trotting away. That's a right response. All I did was raise my voice at it like I would have if my dog had been doing something wrong. So take a look at it if you have time. Like I said, it's usually really not typically hard to haze them out of an area. So I'm going to wrap this up. I want to leave you with some facts this evening. Coyotes weigh between 25 and 40 pounds. Coyotes occur in every state and nearly every large city in the US. There are coyotes in Washington, D.C., in New York. There's a huge research project going on coyotes in Chicago, of all places. They're in Miami, they're in Denver and Los Angeles. If they can live there, they can live anywhere. Attacks by coyotes on humans are fairly rare. Coyotes will kill cats and small dogs if given the opportunity. And they can carry rabies. We didn't talk about this too much. Coyotes can carry rabies, but this is pretty rare. In Florida, there have only been 2 coyotes to test positive for rabies. So I'm going to leave you with some advice as well. Don't feed them, or really any wild animal. And as a reminder, it is illegal to feed coyotes in Florida. Please don't feed them. Most people know it's illegal to feed alligators. Alligator's brain is like the size of a walnut. It's really small. Coyotes are one of the most intelligent species living in the area today. They figure it out a lot faster than alligators do, and coyotes can get aggressive once they've been fed. Prevent access to garbage and pet food. Keep cats indoors. Have small dogs on a short leash or in a well-fenced-in yard. Follow those hazing recommendations I gave you earlier to consistently frighten coyotes away. And in the very unlikely event that you were to have a coyote approach you in an aggressive manner, you'd want to lift up your pet or your small child off the ground and be prepared to defend yourself. The absolute worst thing you could do if you see or encounter a coyote is run. Please don't run. If you run, they will give chase, just like a dog would. Remember, they're not very large. They're about 25 to 40 pounds. They're averaging 27 pounds in Florida. So who should you call if you have a problem about a coyote in Florida? Call us. As I mentioned at the start of the presentation, I have staff based around the state. Their job is to talk to the public who are having conflicts with wildlife. Call us. We're available Monday to Friday, 8 to 5 at our West Palm Beach office. That number is on the screen. If you feel someone is feeding coyotes, regardless, if it's direct, like hand feeding, or indirect, leaving the food out and the coyotes are getting into it, you can call us. Our wildlife alert hotline is on the screen. That number is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That goes to our law enforcement center. You can report that anonymously if you wish. If you as a landowner feel that you need to remove a coyote on your property, we didn't talk about this a lot, but if you have questions, I can go into this more. We're going to refer you to hire a trapper, but you should know that coyotes are notoriously difficult to trap, even for professional trappers. It's really better to prevent conflicts with them from the start, because if you're at the point where you need to bring in a trapper, you may not be successful in removing that animal. It has nothing to do with the trapper's experience. It has more to do with just how hard coyotes are to trap. That is the end of my presentation. I will stop. We'll be happy to take questions. And again, I really appreciate you hanging out with me this evening and learning something about coyotes. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Angeli. We do have a few questions in the chat. The first question is, will coyotes eat through screened-in backyards?
As in eat the screen to get into a backyard? They wouldn't eat the screen. They could pop the screen. And we've had coyotes pop screens before, not necessarily to get into a yard, but to get into a lanai or onto a porch. There's almost, in every one of those cases I can think of, and that's pretty rare, there's been something on the porch they've wanted. Most of the time it's cat food or it's cat. screens really aren't a good barrier for wildlife. So to answer your question, yes, they can pop a screen, but as long as there's nothing on the interior that they want, you should not have an issue with them doing that.
Okay, great. The next question is, with more and more development encroaching their habitat, what do you and your team see happening to coyotes in the future?
It's a great question. So development, it kind of works the opposite with coyotes. So with most wildlife, as you develop, you're pushing wildlife out. Panthers are a good example of that, or bears are a good example of that. Coyotes would rather live with people. So in essence, they're attracted to development because they can have smaller territories, there's more food around people. So as Florida develops, I would hypothesize that there will be just as many or potentially greater populations of coyotes as we continue to develop. Those urban areas that have coyotes have smaller territories, so you could essentially have denser coyote populations in urban environments. And I didn't mention, we don't know what the coyote population is in Florida. Nobody's looking at that, but all indications are that it's stable, if not increasing. That was a great question.
Our next question is, any issue with rabies in coyotes? If so, how might that impact action to take with aggressive coyotes?
Sure, great question. We have had only 2 coyotes test positive for rabies in the state of Florida. So it seems to be pretty rare for coyotes in Florida. If you compare that to raccoons, there's probably been more than half a dozen at least raccoons that have tested positive for rabies in just this year. Coyotes do some weird stuff if they're positive for rabies, but it's really hard to tell if they have rabies versus distemper. The clinical signs are the same. The only way you can tell for sure is if the animal is not alive anymore and you look at the brain to see if it has rabies. Regardless, they should do some weird stuff if they have rabies or distemper. It's neurologic. So think like, we all hear foaming at the mouth. They foam at the mouth because the throat closes. The throat paralyzes and they can't swallow anymore. That's why they salivate or foam at the mouth. But they'll also appear emaciated because they can't eat because their throat closes. So they'll appear emaciated. Sometimes they'll stagger like they're drunk. They'll attack inanimate objects like stop signs or trees. Sometimes they'll sit really far back on their haunches. I've seen foxes do this. They'll sit back on their haunches and they'll sway and they'll look at the sky and their jaws will move. It's really, really eerie. Those are all signs of a diseased animal. If you were to encounter something like that, you'd want to call FWC or a wildlife rehabber or animal services. Any one of those 3 partners should be able to help. If a rabid coyote, if a coyote in general bites someone, then Department of Health would want to get involved to make sure that person has access to rabies prophylaxis, especially if that animal is not captured to test, whether it's a coyote or a bobcat or really any wildlife.
And our last question in the chat, how long do the pups stay with the parents before leaving?
Oh,
If they stay, how many will stay with the family unit?
That's a great question. So most of the time, the pups are going to disperse about October. So they're going to stay, so they're born around February, March. They're going to stay with the family unit until about October. Sometimes. Not all of them will leave. Sometimes the young will hang back and help the adult, 1 or 2 young, usually not more than that. They will hang back, stay with the adults and help them raise the next generation. That's kind of that complicated social hierarchy I was talking about earlier. So if they are going to disperse, it should be in the next couple of months. The pups will leave the territory and they'll be what we call solitary coyotes. They're going to kind of keep moving until they find an open territory. Or transient coyotes is sometimes what they're called too. But some of them may not do that. Some might hang back and stay with the adults. That's a great question.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Angeli. On behalf of the Village of Wellington, thank you for this great seminar. And to all of our audience members, we will be posting this recording on our Neighborhood Watch webpage, as well as sending out Florida Fish and Wildlife's contact information if anyone else has any questions at the conclusion of this seminar. At this time, I would like to introduce our village manager, Jim Barnes.
Thank you, Gloria. I just want to thank everybody again for joining us this evening on this very informative webinar, and thank you to the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission for partnering with us to be able to provide this information that clearly, a lot of people wanted to get more details on. And it's interesting side note, the joke about Wile E. Coyote and always up to no good. And oddly enough, we owe our roots to the Acme Improvement District, which in those cartoons always seem to be Wile E. Coyote's company, is Acme Dynamite Company and everything else. So interesting fun fact about Acme and the Village of Wellington. But again, thanks everybody for joining us this evening, and I appreciate everybody's time. And just a couple of quick notes to remind everybody, we're in the middle of our budget process. It's that time of year again for local governments in Florida. We adopt our budget October 1st, so the summer is a busy time for budget process, and we want to get your input. If you go to wellingtonfl.gov/budget challenge, there are some priority questions on there that we'd love to hear from you and see what you're interested in, and some of your spending priorities, so that we can incorporate that as we formulate the budget and present that to the Village Council. Also, we have our currently back to school drive, which for the last several years, we've scheduled a back to school drive related to school supplies and backpacks for those that need the most help in our community. And until July 23rd, we are actually collecting school supplies and donations for that back to school drive. And you can drop those off at just about any village facility. We have bins available so that you can drop those off, and we'll be stuffing those for distribution on the 24th. And lastly, as we all know, we're in hurricane season right now, and that'll run until November 30th. As tempting as it is a lot of times, as soon as there's a named storm out there, we just ask that you work with us and refrain from doing any major trimming at that time, given that what usually happens is the entire system for collection and disposal of waste becomes taxed because of the excessive clearing that happens. So just try and work with us and cooperate with us so that we can try and provide the safest environment for everybody, particularly during hurricane season. And in the meantime, while we don't have named storms, notwithstanding the crazy weather we've had lately, go ahead and try and take care of those long overdue trimming projects or any other kind of securing projects that should be happening outside your home. Again, thanks everybody for joining us tonight, and hopefully you'll continue to join us for the next very informative webinar that we have in a couple of weeks on iguanas and Nile monitor lizards. Thanks, Gloria.
Thank you very much, Jim. And also, while you are on the webpage, signing up for the Nile Monitor and Iguana Seminar by Fish and Wildlife, I also recommend that you stop by the upcoming Zoom meetings for our fall neighborhood watch groups. We'll be kicking off our meeting series with the Rye Terrace and Primrose Lane watch meeting scheduled for August 4th. So again, if you're new to the neighborhood watch program, we invite you to listen in on these different neighborhood meetings. And you'll also see here the list of our upcoming meetings. They start August 4th, as I mentioned, and will end August 27th. And if you have any questions from tonight's presentation, please don't hesitate to contact us. And on behalf of Wellington's Neighborhood Watch Program, thank you for joining us this evening. We hope you enjoyed this educational seminar and will continue participating in these programs and meetings. Together, we can continue to keep Wellington a safe hometown. Thank you.